remember to celebrate milestones as you prepare for the road ahead.
Look for the silver lining whenever a cloud appears in the blue. Remember somewhere the sun is shining, and so the right thing to do is make it shine for you.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Between Us, Make Every Conversation Count. I'm your host Santosh Kumar. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about chasing your dreams. We all have dreams, and we all have the ability to dream. The fact is that not everyone has the willingness to truly chase their dreams. So what does that mean? A recent survey of successful entrepreneurs found that 95% of them pursued their dreams despite obstacles, highlighting the importance of persistence and determination in achieving success. This also suggests that the ability to overcome setbacks and stay focused on one's goal is a critical factor in achieving success as an entrepreneur. If you recall from one of my earlier episodes on manifestation, I had said that the only way we can truly manifest our dreams is when we stay true to it and when we believe in it. You know, a dream can be very powerful. It can make you strive and persevere past what people expect of you, and sometimes even past what you expect of yourself. A dream may start off small, but dreams have been known to do many big things, from changing the life of one individual to changing the entire world. Walt Disney once said, "All our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them." Some criticized him and laughed at the magnitude of what he believed he could achieve. However, Walt Disney was able to fulfill his dream by disregarding comments about how his dream was impossible. His dream may not have turned out the same way he thought it would, but by simply chasing a dream, he was able to achieve unimaginable things for himself and for so many others. I firmly believe everyone should have dreams to chase. For even if you fall short of the place you would like to be, take a moment, look behind you, and see how far you've come. Dreams can push you and motivate you to reach heights that you have only ever imagined. So in today's episode, I have a very, very interesting and inspiring guest, Dr. Avanti Purohit. She's a certified anesthesiologist who finally decided to follow her heart, chase her dreams of becoming a fashion designer. Avanti was trained to be a doctor, and she was practicing up until 2020 before she decided that her calling was somewhere else. Actually, she always knew what her calling was. But I guess sometimes in life, we take a little bit of pause and we reflect and we ask ourselves, is this really what we want to do? So without further ado, let me introduce you all to my dear friend, Avanti Purohit. So welcome to the show, Avanti. It's
Thank
wonderful
you.
to have you. So let's begin with your childhood, your growing up years, and the city of Pune.
So I was in Pune up until, so obviously I was born and brought up in Pune. I've been in Pune up until I did my first year of MBBS. So it's probably 21 years.
Mhm.
Growing up in Pune, I think I had a wonderful childhood. I had probably the most indulgent parents that you could think of, parents who were extremely present in my life, whether it had things to do with my schooling, whether it had things to do with my extracurriculars. I think I had a very a sort of a wholesome, kind of a well-rounded childhood. I had a mother who I was extremely close to, a father who was my confidant. I think I've grown up learning that conversations can solve anything. So whether it's boys, whether it's careers, whether it's the class you want to join, whether it's the books you want to read. So I think, in terms of parenting, I think I had the most mature and the most emotionally involved parents. As far as the city goes, I think, I've always had this, because I'm now in Bombay since the last 15 years, and I've been in Pune for, the first 20 years of my life. I've always had this. People always ask me, which one do you like better? I think Pune for me is home. So Pune for me, being a small city, you know everybody. Even in my schooling, even during my schooling, we didn't have that dirty peer pressure. We had, a healthy competition. We were all friends with each other. Money, status, all those things never mattered. You met up in school, you met up for coffee, you played games, and that was it. It was very innocent. It was very laid back. It was very just pure and just simple. So my upbringing and my life in Pune in general overall has been, I think it's been the best years of my life, to be very honest. And I've enjoyed myself and I miss those days.
So when did you develop your habits of reading? Is it something which naturally came up, or you had books around you growing up?
Yes, I did have books around me while growing up because my father is one of the most voracious readers you would come across.
Mhm.
I mean, he was an extremely well-heeled, well-read man. So it's probably because of that, because we had books. I saw books growing up, and things were like gifts were always books. So birthday gifts were books.
What kind of books?
So growing up, I read a lot of Enid Blyton. So I don't exactly have. I don't have a correct or maybe precise memory of what all I read, but Enid Blyton, when I was a child, was pretty predominant. I remember loving Mallory Towers when I was growing
Mhm.
up. It was one of my favorite books. And then, of course, you had Harry Potter. Then you grew up, you had Robin Cook, you had Dan Brown, I used to love James Herriot. I don't know if you've read.
Mhm.
He's basically a
Yes.
veterinary doctor. I used to love his books.
Mhm.
So those I read growing up. Then you had Lee Child. I probably read most of the Lee Child books. So
Mhm.
Jack Reacher was one of my favorite characters. And then eventually, I think now, I've sort of grown out of the fiction crime genre. I now love reading books about history or maybe memoirs. So the recent memoir that I read was Tara Westover, Educated, the book's name is. And two books that I've left right now halfway through because my exams came through were 100 Years War in Palestine and Anarchy. So those were the two books that I was sort of reading parallelly, which I've left
I guess they're
halfway and
pretty
need to.
relevant to today's times.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Tell me something about your school days in terms of the school you went to, the friends you made.
So I went to Abhinav Vidyalaya, which isn't a convent, but obviously it was an English medium school in Pune. And the fun part was that, we never had our classes shuffled. So the same 60 of us, minus a couple here and there, few went away, few sort of joined. We were the same batch of 60 from kindergarten to 10th standard.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
it was beautiful. We never got shuffled. So we were thick, and we still are. We're still in touch. We still have a group where we're all in touch. We know what's happening with each other, even though we don't meet quite often. So yeah.
And then you moved to your MBBS program,
Yes.
right?
So I had to take a gap year in the middle because I did not really get a seat in the first attempt. And that's really important because I had to take a gap year again after my MBBS to get through my PG. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I've been thinking about it. It's important to know that I've spent years doing what I've done, in terms of medicine. But honestly, that really hasn't deterred me from switching because I've heard this. I had my mother also ask me, "You spent so many years in medicine, you took gap years. Do you think you still want to switch?" So that's exactly why it's important for me to mention that I had not one but two gap years. One was prior to my MBBS, and second was after my MBBS.
So the gap year you took was primarily to
Study.
and get into the school of your choice?
Yes. I frankly didn't get any. I mean, I had a very horrible rank, so I wasn't getting through anywhere. It's not like a matter of choice. I wasn't getting through anything. I was probably getting dental, or maybe not even that. So for MBBS. So yes, I took a gap, and then I got through MBBS in Talegaon.
So was MBBS the only thing you wanted to pursue? Was it a personal choice? Was it driven from people around you, your family? What was it?
A lot of that, a lot of these factors. So essentially, I've had these conversations with my husband so many times. You're 16 when you're essentially choosing a career. At least our time, in terms of what you wanted to study, had to be decided before you join classes in 11th. So you're essentially 15 when you decide if you want to take science, arts, or whatever it is. And I think it's super young because you can't really understand the ramifications of a career choice until you're way into your 20s. So I feel like because I was a straight A student, that just seemed like a very normal path to take, or you're taking science. Because I don't know if back then I had the guts or my parents would have supported me thinking about taking arts. Somehow there was this notion that I don't know why it existed, but there was that notion.
So this is interesting. So you're saying that your decision to move into medicine was largely driven by the fact that you were a straight A student
Yes.
and you weren't sure that your parents would
Yes.
support, but you've never had the conversation with them. You never really told them that I'm thinking of pursuing something else.
No. We had a conversation regarding careers, but it was a very boxy sort of a very in terms of okay, these are your options, or this is what you could think of, or law, engineering, science, doctor. You can think of biotechnology and microbiology, but none of these creative fields have ever come up in these kind of discussions. Probably also because my parents themselves weren't really exposed to those kind of things. I don't know if they knew that you could make a career, or I don't know if it was the support necessarily or their lack of knowledge in terms of say interiors or architecture or painting, or not that I was a good painter, but just the creative fields. That was never an option that was presented to me ever.
So there's this notion, and I might sound a little stereotypical here, but if you are a straight A student, you either love to read books
Mhm.
or write
Mhm.
or be completely into your studies.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Were there anything else which you would love to do while growing up? Anything artsy?
So fashion was something that was always on my mind. I think my introduction to fashion was probably when I was 6, 7 years old. I mean, I didn't know if I could actually make a career out of it, but I definitely wanted to learn and know more about it. I think, like I said, my introduction to fashion was very early on. I used to accompany my mother to her designer's studio, right?
Mhm.
So it's interesting how we were a family that never really went to, or very rarely went to department stores to buy outfits. It's funny because back then we didn't have Zara's and H&M's. You had shops on Lakshmi Road, you had shops in Camp. That's where you went. You got ready-made frocks.
So
and that's
Lakshmi
it.
Road and Camp,
Yeah.
both from the city of Pune, right?
Yes, both from the city of Pune. But somehow my dad had his own tailor where he would get his pants and shirts done. My mom had her own designer. So right since I was a kid, I think I've had that exposure of going to a designer, seeing what a designer actually does. And somehow I have such vivid memories of the designer that my mom used to visit. She still visits her even today. She has her studio at Prabhat Road in Pune and a very eclectic dance studio. At the entrance, you would be greeted by this massive stone basin, which is to have like this water and fresh flowers from a garden, candles and things like that. And then you would walk in, you would have racks of clothes on the right-hand side, ready to be sent to their respective people. You would have a little space on the left where tailors basically sat. So there's this constant humdrum of, sewing machines while you were basically chit-chatting with her. And then there would be like a narrow alleyway you would go in, and then there would be a space where you would all sit, be surrounded by textiles. You would have these low seatings, and then she would sit with her paper and pen and start. And back then, you didn't have visual references. You didn't have Pinterest. You didn't have things which you could show, right? So whatever my mom wanted, she would she would basically describe. This woman would draw, sketches essentially, and then she would start removing, textiles that she now I know in hindsight. Obviously, back then as a 6-year-old, you don't know what textiles are. You just remember being surrounded by colors. But then she would, whip up textiles, and then she would start pinning them onto her paper, and then it would just come to life. She would also source these little trinkets, jewelry from Rajasthan and from Jaipur and places like that. And she would then start matching. So it was so brilliant. You would get an outfit and then you would get jewelry along with it. She would pair things up. And I remember how that, essentially made me feel. It used to make me so, I don't know, at home, happy. Even today when I go to a place like Mangaldas Market, which is like hot, crowded, I still feel amidst textiles and stores and colors, I still feel the same feeling that I used to when I used to sit in her place. So I think my introduction to fashion was then. The little inception or seeds of inception. It was probably then.
So as you grew up,
Yeah.
you continued visiting these stores with your mom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Up until probably I got married. Absolutely. Yes. My mother still goes to her. And not just that, my mother herself is a great knitter. She does embroidery at home. So she does kasuti embroidery, which is native to Karnataka. So she would have people's saris, family members would send saris and hankies and dress materials. So it's not just in stores. I've seen this at home. She was a complete embroidery whiz. And even growing up, right up until probably middle school, my sweaters were all hand knitted by my mother. So I think it's just been in my sort of blood ever since I've grown up.
I feel like I'm revisiting my childhood. So I spent the first 13 years of my life with my nani,
Mm-hmm.
with my grandmom, and I learned knitting. I learned how to wash clothes.
Wow.
I learned how to make chapatis.
Same here. Yeah.
All of those
From
from
my
her.
nana.
And every time I would do a task, she would give me a coin, and that is how I
That's
learned. And this is really interesting. So you said that as you grew, your interest in clothes, in fashion grew,
yes.
but that was never something which you thought of as you would make it as a part of your
No.
profession. You never knitted anything while growing up.
Nope. Never. Never. I never indulged in the crafts back then. No. It was only classes, and I'll be really honest, I used to really not have any time left. I used to probably be home only for dinner and sleep and maybe homework. Even reading took up a hit. My reading habits plummeted after I started anything that was related to med school, even during med school, because whatever time was spare was either spent reading and studying or sleeping or resting up. So all of these kind of creative things that I probably would have liked to do never really materialized.
So if medical school wouldn't have happened, still no fashion, still no
No,
clothes.
no, those were not the conversations we were having at all at home. Nope, it wouldn't have happened.
Okay.
In fact, I think, honestly, even for myself, I don't know if it sounds ignorant or naive, but the pragmatism or the possibility of turning fashion into a career for me in my mind has been quite recent. Let's just say in the last 5 to 7 years. For me, it was when I got exposed to the world of online shopping, slow fashion brands on Instagram, is when I realized that there are young girls, probably 22, 23, just fresh out of NIFT, National Institute of Fashion Technology, who were opening their brands and who had a loyal audience. So you could do it is something that I realized. And there are people also who don't have any background in fashion, who have very successful brands. So I think, like I said, the logistics of it is something that I realized in the last 5 to 7 years, not before that. In fact, I remember having a conversation with Deepak, my husband, where I was indulging in a lot of retail therapy, especially during COVID. That's when I think, the wheels were turning in full force, because that's when I started telling him that this is possible and I really think I should do it. I really want to do it, rather not should do it, because should do it was something that he told me, but I want to do it.
It's interesting, because COVID has been a time of self-reflection for
Yes.
many,
Yep.
including myself. As I
Yes.
sit and host this podcast, I started podcasting during that phase
Mhm.
where I just thought about sitting out there and sharing whatever I wanted to share
Right.
without being asked not to say certain things.
Right.
And that's how podcasting happened. But the fact is that I probably would have always been a podcaster, maybe not the term podcast, but I would always have been the person who would tell stories.
Mhm.
I feel that all of us are storytellers
Right.
in our own right, but I also feel that the most important story we tell is the story we tell ourselves.
Right.
So I guess the story you told yourself was that it is time for you to transition to something which you really wanted to do.
Absolutely. Yes.
So you did mention about fun growing up time, great parents. How's life post married?
It has, oh my God, I could go on and on. We could have a podcast entirely on that. I feel
Maybe
like
we will.
I feel like I've married the best man on this planet. And I genuinely say this. People talk about how things changed after marriage. Nothing for me changed after marriage. In fact, there were a lot of things that were missing probably prior to me being married to Deepak that now I have with him. We have an excellent companionship. We're genuine equals in our marriage, essentially, in terms of not having gender roles in our home. We don't have gender roles in our home. Like, he is very happy to be taking care of the kitchen, very happy to be working, very happy to be doing anything and everything. So essentially, in terms of marriage, I think I'm extremely, extremely blessed.
You can choose to knock the wood. It's perfect. Because this reminds me of my growing up days, and I can't help mention my parents. And my mom got married when she was 19. She literally almost eloped with my dad, and she moved to Calcutta. And I was born when she turned 20. And she chose to not go to college so that she could raise me, because my brother was born almost four years later. And they never had a fixed role. My dad
Right.
always had a traveling job.
Right.
And I remember distinctly when he was home, he would take care of the home and he would let mom go out with her friends and just enjoy so that he could babysit both me and my brother. And I think that was equal companionship. So when you said about your husband and you, it reminds me. And I think at the end of the day, it's about partnership.
Absolutely.
There is no gender when it comes
Yes,
to
exactly.
it's about partnership. Your dream is your partner's dream, and your partner's dream is your
It's your
dream.
dream. Absolutely.
And if you let each of the individuals grow, I think that's a wholesome marriage for you. So
Absolutely.
that's wonderful. Coming back to your medical school,
Mhm.
was it just the COVID, or was it your experiences in the medical school, or you pursuing a career in medicine when you realized, okay, I'm doing this, but I don't think I'm meant for this?
It's basically the latter. So I wouldn't want to blame the career per se, but I think it had a lot to do with my mental makeup at the time or over the years. I felt like I was an autopilot. I felt like I was in a hamster's wheel, essentially, birthdays passing by, paycheck to paycheck, year to year, birthday to birthday, without ever getting a chance to pause and do things that I wanted to do. I would probably, my mother lives probably 10 minutes away. I mean, we live in Grant Road in Bombay, and my mother lives at Chapati. I would probably meet her once in 4 months. I'm not saying this is for everyone. I'm sure there are people who manage to find a work-life balance. My husband does find a work-life balance despite the fact that he's a doctor himself. But I guess I wasn't able to do that as well. I felt very stifled. I felt like there was a certain dormancy that was hitting. I also felt like I wasn't growing spiritually. I wasn't growing. I don't think I was growing as a person. There was nothing new that I was looking forward to.
Do you believe in destiny?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I mean, I do. You can't sit in a chair and expect destiny to come to you. Obviously, you have to work towards it, but I do believe that something somewhere is already, things are written.
So do you believe
work towards it.
your current profession
I was destined to do?
you're destined to do?
Yes. Yes. And a lot of things have led me to that, whether it's the man that I married, whether it's the 6-year-old memory I have of, visiting the designer, or a lot of things, or COVID, or the realization that, I was done with medicine, all of those things. They've all led me to basically be here.
So did you meet your husband during your medical school?
Yes, I did meet him.
So
during
do you
med school.
believe that you pursuing medicine was destined?
Yes, absolutely.
Because you had to meet your partner?
Absolutely. And even the person that I am, honestly. I mean, I do have a lot to owe to medicine. I mean, the discipline, or in general, just I do feel like medicine has given me quite a bit. The things that I read, the things that I learned, I mean, nothing is waste. Or the people that I met in terms of patients or relatives. I mean, it's beautiful. I did have a lot of fulfilling experiences. I've met some amazing people, even in the form of mentors.
What is the memory of your first meeting with your husband?
So the first meeting, I'll talk about the first memory and I'll talk about the memorable memory also. The first memory was in a random canteen at Hinduja Hospital. I remember he has this lion tattoo, which is gaudy and weird. And I remember seeing that across the table. And I remember having a conversation about that with him. And I remember him saying that he didn't know why he got that tattoo. So he didn't even have a reason why he had that tattoo. So that was my first memory. And the most memorable memory is when my eligibility certificate from DNB hadn't arrived. And there was a big hula boo around it. And I was supposed to be sending out these emails to NatBoard, basically our board. And I was losing my mind over it. And he saw me. I was outside near the tea station and he offered to help. He's like, what's happening? And I told him, and I was crying. I usually get extremely hyper when there's something not working out. And he calmly told me, okay, let's work this out. So he sat down with me. He bunked his lecture, which now in hindsight, I know he loves to do. He sat down with me and then he typed out all those emails that I had to send across with all the documents that I needed to sort of scan and send. And then just to calm me down, he's like, why don't we take a walk around? And me being me, bunking, I was done with my work. So I wanted to go back to the classroom and attend the lecture. And he's like, let's just take a break. Let's just walk around. So we were in this extremely horrible mall in the middle of probably Ghaziabad. It was horrible. But we decided to take a walk and it was shut that day for some reason. I think maybe it was a Sunday. I don't know why it was shut, but it was shut. And I remember us walking around the mall for a good, 2.5 hours? Just talking about things. That's how we got to know each other. That's exactly how we started. We started talking. We talk a lot. Conversations. And that's exactly how I've grown up. anything and everything in our house we would have conversations. It was never my way or the highway. I never had that attitude in my house growing up. My parents never said, this is what we think you should do and you're supposed to do that. That's what I share with him too now.
So, to all the listeners of Between Us podcast, life is about conversations, guys.
Yes,
So,
it is.
do remember that. So, tell me, while you were pursuing your medical school, and did you also get to work in any hospital
Yeah,
while
yeah, yeah.
you
Well,
were
absolutely,
working?
absolutely.
Did fashion swing by your mind while you were working?
Constantly,
Clothes, it was always there,
constantly.
constantly.
Yeah. I mean, whether it's something as menial as browsing through Instagram, discovering new brands, or it's then getting acquainted to the more academic side of fashion in terms of actually watching international designers, their ramp walks, studying, their brand language and their core aesthetic and figuring out things. Or it's just trend forecasting, which I honestly back then didn't know it was trend forecasting. I would watch a few shows and then, analyze them and just realize that this is what's coming up. These are the commonalities. And surely, slowly, they would trickle down and then think places like Zara would suddenly have those things popping up. So, now we know that it's actually a profession. It's trend forecasting. It's when you sit and observe what the big guys are doing and what's trickling down, right up to streetwear. So I realized that's exactly what I was doing in the last 5-7 years. So while I was working, this used to be a constant thread, a constant thread.
Do you feel in some way, subconsciously, you manifested this new career of yours?
Absolutely. I do feel, yes. Because
Do
it's
you?
constantly been on my mind, right? So it's that sort of an energy is constantly being put out. So I'm sure in some way or the other, I must have manifested this for myself. And even at conversations at home, I mean, if you were to go through my camera roll, you would find more screenshots and more articles on fashion than you would on medicine,
Okay.
for sure.
So when you decided that this is what you want to do,
Mhm.
and it took you probably a year or two to decide,
Yes,
did that in any way affect your then work?
I will say it did. I won't say I was as involved. I mean, I've never been distracted at work because I was working in the critical care department then.
Yeah.
So I couldn't afford being distracted. But I did feel that I was a little less involved. And I would wait to rush home to figure out, because we had started researching. So that was something that I would look forward to more than my days at work. So I do feel that, yes, I was feeling a little less involved at work.
What was going through your mind the day you put in your papers at work and the last day at work? Did you go through or reminisce your MBBS days, your postgrad days?
I remember we discussing this and I'd put in my papers a month prior because I think we had to give a month's notice back then. And there was this a mixed or rush of emotions because while I was excited for what was in store for me, there was immense amount of anxiety because I knew I wasn't going to come back. And I didn't want to have a plan B. We always spoke about it and I always knew that should this not work out for me, I could always come back and be a doctor. I didn't want to have these exit strategies. I wanted to get into fashion without having to look back. So I knew that would probably be the last time that I would be in a hospital. You form certain attachments even with the patients that you're seeing, right? And you're used to, you're going to come back to work the next day and you're going to see how well they're doing. I knew I'm not going to come back, not just to do that, but not at all in this scenario. And I'm not going to enter or step foot in a hospital in the capacity of a doctor for at least a while. So I did end up reminiscing. I was sad. I was excited and I was extremely anxious because I was still very unsure of where I was headed. Even though I knew I wanted to do it, I still didn't know what was in store for me. So it was a mixture of all of this.
So before I really get into what you're doing right now, you mentioned about your patients. Is there anything, any one experience which you would like to share?
Yes, I would, in fact. So this incident is actually it's the most uncanny thing that's happened to me. We had this one patient, I won't take names, but we had this one patient who was in the COVID ICU where we were working. So when I was in Hinduja, I was in Hinduja in the thick of COVID. So we would have 1 week in the COVID ICU and 1 week in the regular non-COVID ICU. So while I was in the COVID ICU, we had this one patient, elderly gentleman, who had a very protracted illness. I mean, he was probably there in the ICU for 2.5 months or maybe more, both in the COVID and then when he got better, even in the regular ICU. And, we're kind of, I don't mean to generalize, but we're kind of used to a certain level of verbal harassment. It's become a norm when it comes to your dealings with patients' relatives. It's pretty prevalent now. whether it's outright violence or it's just these subtle things on the phone where people are being rude to you. So I've never really had very strong bonds with the relatives of patients. But there was this patient's daughter, I remember, when he was shifted back to the regular ICU and she was allowed to visit him. I remember she would always inquire about the doctors first, whether the doctor has eaten, whether the doctor is rested, is the doctor free to talk. Always extremely respectful, very mindful of the things that probably the doctor is going through. And somehow, there was a very, very, there was a connection. So other than obviously what we used to discuss about her father, I ended up giving, I don't share my personal number with relatives, but I had somehow, in case she wanted to talk about her father outside of the hospital. We're probably not allowed to do that. We're not supposed to do that, but I'd done that with her. And he got better. He went home. Whenever she used to come to meet him in the ICU and I used to be on duty, we used to talk about everything under the sun, about the fact that she was in the US. So she basically born and brought up in Bombay, but was currently working in the US. Obviously was back in Bombay because her father was admitted. So we would have all these random conversations. He got discharged, he went home, and that was that. Cut to 2 years later, a month back. My stepbrother, who's in the US, he calls me up and he tells me, are you free? Are you free to talk? And I was going to go in one of my fashion school lectures. I was late for a lecture and I said, you know what? I don't know if it's a good time to talk right now because I'm about to enter my classroom. And he said, you know what? This is going to take 2 minutes and you need to hear this. And he took the name of this person. He's like, this so-and-so person is sitting next to me. And I am not very great with names, but I remembered her name, this relative's name. And he's like, this person is sitting in front of me and do you know her? And I'm like, of course I do. 2 years back, I remember treating her father in the ICU. And he's like, she'd want to talk to you. And he's sitting in the US in San Jose in his house. She takes the phone. We connect and she's like, hi. And we both broke down somehow. I don't know. It was just such a heavy moment. And it so happened that she was visiting California. She's been friends with my brother since the last 20 years. They ended up talking about family. She ended up telling him how unwell her father was. But she ended up remembering that one doctor that helped her get through things. And she said, I remember the doctor's name and her name is Avanti. And he said 1 second, and then they tallied that I was in Hinduja at the same time. So she had my number, which is again something that I don't normally do. So they tallied the numbers, and it turned out to be the same person, which is me. And that's when she said that I need to talk to her. And she called me up, and she was probably bawling on the phone. But she told me how big a difference I made. And in that moment, it's just about the connection. I wasn't thinking of what I did for her or for her. Obviously in a doctor's capacity, I was doing the best I could. But just the fact that your conversations, your mannerism, the way you're dealing with patients is actually causing such a huge effect on somebody, and something that she remembered 2 years later and happened to be a friend of my brother's. I think that's one of the most uncanny things that have happened to me. So yeah.
I have a lot of friends who've had not so good experiences with their physicians, with their doctors. And some of them have come back and told me that at that point in time, if they did not behave appropriately with a doctor, it could be because of the emotions they were going through. Right? So, this is interesting. So, you decided to transition to fashion and you went the old school way by enrolling yourself in a fashion school?
Absolutely.
So tell us something about that.
So essentially, I always knew that I wanted to educate myself in terms of not just because there's one thing when you like something and there's one thing when you study it and you realize, one, if you're good at it, or two, if it's feasible to eventually maybe make a vocation out of it. So I always knew that I wanted to educate myself, or maybe attend fashion school. So we started doing the research probably a year prior to me leaving my workplace, wherein we realized that it's funny that colleges in India, design schools in India, which are basically under the government, like NIFT and NID, have age caps. I don't know if it's correct or not, but the age cap for NIFT was 23 and for NID, I think it was 31 or 32. And I was 33.
Okay.
So I knew that I couldn't apply and give entrance exams and get through these government operated colleges. I knew that I had to sort of apply to private schools. So out of the private schools that we were researching, we realized we shortlisted two, which was one was Pearls Academy and one was Istituto Marangoni. Somehow Istituto Marangoni stood out for multiple reasons. One was because I knew what I wanted to learn. I knew I wanted to eventually not get into bridal wear and, couture. Essentially, I wanted to basically have an exposure to European or Western RTW, which is ready to wear. And I knew Marangoni did just that. Essentially, you had an international exposure because it's an Italian school, right, with campuses in Europe, multiple campuses in Europe. So I knew that that kind of an exposure was something that I would have at Marangoni, but I wasn't sure about where I'll get through. So I essentially applied to both. Pearl's Academy, which is in Bombay, and Instituto, which is at Worli, again in Bombay. But I got through a scholarship. I got through Marangoni with a scholarship. And of course, I wanted Marangoni. So that's how I shortlisted. So I didn't have to give an exam. I had to submit a couple of portfolios, things that probably I have done in my pastime and which I had aplenty. So I sort of compiled everything and I sent it to Marangoni and I got through Marangoni on a scholarship. Fashion school probably has been the best 2 years of my life. I can't begin to tell you how the amount of things I've learned, the people that I've met, the conversations I've had, it's absolutely been literally one of the best 2 years of my life.
So which year did you enroll for your?
I started in 2021 and now I finished in 23. So 21 August is when I started. And right now in 23 April is when I finished. So I had 4 semesters.
Did you have a gap year between your leaving work?
Nope. I had 7 days in the middle. Nope. Funnily, that's what we've been discussing. Other than the gap years that I had while studying, in between jobs also, I think the maximum time that I've spent is 7 days. So even between this, it was a 7-day gap. I left medicine, my Hinduja last date, and my fashion school first date. There was a gap of a week. And that's it. And I had 4 semesters where I think I got to learn everything from design development to these fancy softwares. You have your CAD softwares, you have your 3D softwares. I got acquainted with art history, which is something that I absolutely love. And learned pattern making, learned sewing, learned a lot of things basically. A lot of new skills.
But so tell me something. Did you need to go to a school?
Yes.
Or did you feel that your inherent understanding or what you learned helped you?
No, I think I needed to go
what
to
you
school.
wanted to pursue.
I think it's absolutely imperative. I mean, fashion is such a misunderstood field because everyone thinks it's just so easy to do it, right? I mean, it's just it's a myth, right? That, it's everything that you need is there online, right? Or visual references, most of us tell our tailor what to make. We have a photo. But to actually run a brand, to actually own a brand, there is a lot that you need to know, and there's a lot that is taught in fashion schools and things that you can't get off the internet. Like, for example, I was barely aware that to basically run a successful brand, you needed to stick to a core aesthetic. You couldn't design jeans one day and then go and design lehengas the other day. Even the jeans that you would probably design needed to be in a certain aesthetic to be relevant in the market. So things like that. And even collection development, things are not easy. To basically go from an idea or a concept or an inspiration that's around you to an actual garment is not a process that you can self-teach.
What was the portfolio you submitted as a part of your...
So there were these mock collections that I'd imagined that I would make, right? So,
Something you always visualized?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So whether it's the palette, whether it's the silhouettes, and I think I'm assuming that that's exactly what they like, because a sense of color, a sense of silhouettes, a sense of style is something that I feel I inherently had. I mean, without sounding pompous, but I think that's fine. So I think that's probably what they saw in the portfolios, because I feel that I can connect all of these things together when it comes to making a collection. So I think that's probably why I got the scholarship, maybe.
How do you see fashion in general in the context of our country? Because I think there's a lot of emphasis, even from the government and other institutions, towards India,
Right.
Indian fashion, Indian clothes, focusing on the artisans, the weavers. So is that something which you want to focus on? Is that something which you will do? Or is it going to be pure European fashion?
So, it's funny how everyone thinks that these two things are separate. You could have an Indian craft that is embedded with a European silhouette or a contemporary European aesthetic. And that's exactly what I've done even for my graduation collection. So because the theme was so personal to me and it was based on, my time with my grandparents in their homes, I did not want to get... And for me personally, textiles it's like a cynosure for me. It's not just about the designs, right?
Mhm.
So because I've always seen my grandmother wear these amazing jamdani muslins at home, or the choices of these Calcutta silks, crisp Calcutta silks, I wanted to do justice to the textiles because this collection was an ode to them. So for my collection, even though the aesthetic per se, when you look at the collection, you're going to probably see a European RTW collection. The textiles were absolutely Indian. They were sourced from weavers. So in fact, one of the weavers that I sourced my textiles from also dyed them for me, using natural indigo. So the textile that I got from him was hand spun, which is with the charkha, and hand woven.
Mhm.
Most of my textiles are hand woven, but this particular thing was hand spun as well. And it was indigo dyed. So indigo dyeing is one of the crafts that weavers and master dyers in Bujori Bhuj actually practice. You do have master dyers that live in and around Kutch, where we're growing, your indigo plant, which is basically your Indifera, I think, tintorium. That's the species that we're growing, I think, in Southeast Asia, right? So the pigment that is extracted from the leaves essentially is then put into the vat so the pigment that you extract from the leaves essentially doesn't really adhere to yarn, right? So you can't dye clothes with it. So to dye clothes with it, you need to have the indigo pigment reduced. So there are vats that are built, which are these huge vessels underneath, the surface of the earth, where you basically put things that make the solution alkaline, right? And obviously reduce, so there's no soluble oxygen, to then make this pigment adhere to yarn.
That is so fascinating.
Yeah. So there are people who are doing it. And an indigo vat is like a child. It's extremely unpredictable. You have to nurture it, feed it. So they use jaggery, they use alum, they use all these, locally available things to maintain pHs because it's very temperamental. You probably could have a vat that's probably acting up. So you can't guarantee the color, you can't guarantee the behavior of the vat. And there are people who are spending decades behind this science, who are working with indigo. So one of my weavers was doing that for me as well. So you can have both things together.
And I totally get that. But, I'm just saying, I'm hoping that when you get your own label, your brand, there would be an ode to the artisans and weavers.
Absolutely, yes.
Because somewhere I think they need to be heard and they need to be appreciated.
Absolutely.
And people in Europe need to know that these come in from.
Yes.
Because I think probably even before these things were happening, but I think our clothes and our weavers and artisans were not getting the kind of recognition they were getting.
Absolutely.
So, but tell us in general about your experiences working with these weavers and artisans. Do you feel, what was the experience like? You said you worked with a couple of them?
Yes, so unfortunately I haven't really gone and met them. So this was all telephonically and video calls and things like that. But the ones that I was working with, they were really, I feel, very technologically savvy, which can't be really said about most of them now. So, this weaver that I was talking about has his own Instagram page, which is very aesthetically done. So that's how I in fact found him, So he's very savvy when it comes to DMing and, the payment methods and the shipping and everything. So this one was really very, very savvy and very forthcoming with that. So I think it was, the process has been extremely smooth. They're very patient. They're ready to teach you. They're ready to, make you understand, help you choose. They're not very stuck up when it comes to sending samples, because usually you see that people don't want to let go of things that they have. And I've got a lot of free, obviously I ended up paying for them, but he would be forthcoming with sending, okay, I'll send you shades, I'll send you samples of cloth. We do so many weaves. So they're very extremely friendly, extremely easy to, at least the ones that I've dealt with. Very warm. And I've had the best experience, honestly.
And
very
you're looking
seamless.
forward to working with a lot more of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Genuinely.
And I think the advancement of technology helps a lot,
Yes.
right? For these people to really come forward. I was reading an article the other day, I think just yesterday, which said that there is an e-commerce portal which has come up for artisans and weavers where, they could directly sell with 0% commission to be paid.
Right.
And they can reach out to their customers directly. That's...
There are a couple of non-profits also now working. There's Neela House in Jaipur. There's Loom in Hand. I think they're based in Pune. So they're non-profit, so they don't make, but they just create a platform where the weavers can sell their wares,
Wonderful.
or they can host workshops.
What were the name?
Neela
you said?
House.
Neela House.
It's in Jaipur, and in Loom in Hand. I'm sure there are, I've not even scratched the surface. I'm sure there are plenty more, but these are the ones that I sort of, through my research and through my weavers, these are the two places.
So all of the prospective fashion designers and people who are already with their label, these are the two institutions you could probably reach out to, who could probably connect you with the right kind of the right group of artisans and weavers. All right, I think this has been an interesting conversation. Is there anything you want to tell people, to my listeners, about, not just about, fashion or medicine, but I think it would be wonderful if you could share what should one do if they have dreams. And sometimes they probably don't even know that this is what they want to do. And based on my discussion with you, I feel that even it took you some time to realize what you want to do. Is there anything you want to share with
Absolutely.
with the audience?
I can obviously talk from experience. You can't have, unfortunately, a fits all kind of an advice, but I can definitely, based on what I did, essentially. So to start off with, I would want to give a sort of an organized answer for this because it's important. To start off with, I think it was very important for me to know what I was leaving behind, in a sense, because this was something that I had given 15 years to. So for me, it was important. I'm not saying it's probably important for everyone, but for me, it was important to know what I was leaving behind. And that's exactly why, I spent not just 2 years, but I probably spent close to 3 years trying to figure out if it was medicine or what I was doing that was causing me to not like the life that I was leading. So even while I was working at Asian Cancer Institute, I remember wanting to leave to figure out because I was at Asian Cancer Institute for 2.5 years. So I thought it's probably the stagnancy there because I was there for a long time. So I left that to join H&N Reliance to see if a change of place would help me, get rid of the dormancy that I was feeling. But H&N Reliance, I had a short stint, and then I thought maybe it's anesthesiology. Let's just try doing critical care. Let's just see if something new will, reignite the interest. That's when I did critical care in Hinduja, only to realize that it was none of this, essentially. So it was just, I was genuinely ready to leave medicine. And that's exactly why I have no regrets, because I tried everything that I had in the reserve to essentially know for sure that this is not something that I want to continue doing. Right? So that's something that I feel is important. The second thing I feel is educating yourself, because not just so that you're well prepared for a vocation, because that's not why you're transitioning.
Sure.
It's important to sort of be well informed. It's also important when, I realized that I got exposed to so many new things while I was studying. It wasn't just fashion design. Like I said, art history. While studying for prints, essentially when I was researching for prints, like we used to, basically we had this semester where we had to include prints in our design, right? So you had to research on prints, like a digital print, say for example. And I got exposed to these, I found these beautiful collage artists, Catrion, De Blauer, and Petra Zenner. I didn't know collage making. We know collages from school, we know tearing up paper and sticking it. Collage making is nothing close to that. There's actual storytelling, and there are artists who are making a living out of digital and analog collages, right? So these are the things I got exposed to. So I think when you take education or you decide to study things properly, there are things that might just open up, which you've probably not anticipated. So that would be the second thing. And also I feel the moment I think my parents and my well-wishers probably were on board when they knew I was taking a well-informed decision. So when you're trying to involve people and trying to get support, it's always good when you're sort of taking a well-informed decision. And the third thing was, like you said a while back, I think it's just we owe it to ourselves. I was telling Deepak the other day that we owe it to ourselves to give ourselves that chance to live out our passions. I mean, if it's taking, when you're 70 years old and you're going to look back, 2 years is not going to make a difference. At least you'll have tried, whether it works out or not. So, yeah, that would be the 3 things.
Thank you so much, Avanti, for your time.
Thank you for having me.
To all my audience and everyone out there, chase your dreams, live your life. Always remember that when you have a desire, it is a message from within you asking you to pursue that dream. So, it's very simple. You want to buy a car because cars exist. You want to buy a house because house exists. You want to travel to a particular place because that place exists. So anything, any dream that comes into your heart, I feel that it's a message from within. It's a calling for you to chase your dreams. Everybody has the ability to dream, but very few have the willingness to chase it. So until next time, stay happy, stay healthy. See you soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Between Us podcast. This podcast was recorded at manicpod Studios in Chembur, Mumbai. Our sound engineer is Mainak Chakraborty, and your producers are Arnav Dogra and Santosh Kumar. The Between Us podcast uploads episodes weekly, and we'll see you next time.